Just give me a second. Hello. No, but so we watch it, but I was saying it was like the greatest Hollywood super spreader event.
The air in Edinburgh that night was heavy with the kind of silence that only a city steeped in history can hold. Its cobblestone streets glistening under the faint drizzle as the flickering yellow lamplight spilled through narrow alleys. In one of those alleys, hidden behind a thick oak door marked only by a faded brass plaque, was a small pub, warm, quiet, untouched by fame. It was here that Sam Heughan, the man whose name had become synonymous with grace, strength, and quiet mystery, sat alone at a corner table, the rim of a wine glass catching the amber light. His phone buzzed softly, a new email from an anonymous address, and as his eyes scanned the screen, a cold weight settled in his chest. Every secret of his love life, every whisper, rumor, and truth was about to be revealed. For a man who had spent years protecting his private world from the voracious hunger of public curiosity, this felt like the unraveling of a life he had tried so hard to keep sacred. He leaned back, heart pounding, eyes unfocused, and for a long moment, he didn't move. Outside, the city carried on. People laughing, taxis splashing through puddles. But inside, Sam sat still, remembering the faces of those he had loved and lost. The stories that had shaped him not as the actor the world adored, but as a man who had tried, in his own quiet way, to love honestly in a world that rarely allows honesty to survive. It all began long before the red carpets and camera flashes. Back in 2008, when Sam was still a young actor trying to find his place in a brutal industry. Those were humble years, spent attending small theater events, charity galas, and local film festivals across Scotland. Years when he was known not for his fame, but for his sincerity. At one such event in Glasgow, he met Alyssa Grant, a local indie singer whose voice carried the softness of twilight and whose laughter seemed to belong to another era. They met after a charity concert, two dreamers drawn together by the shared hunger of humility with which Sam spoke about art, how he saw acting not as fame but as service to story and truth. Sam, in turn, was enchanted by her gentleness, by the way she looked at him as though the world was still a place worth believing in. They began to meet quietly, coffee in small cafes, walks through Prince's Street gardens, long conversations about music and film, about the kind of lives they hoped to lead. For 6 months, it was simple, tender, untouched by the noise of celebrity. But as Sam's career began to move forward, casting calls took him far from home, and the quiet closeness between them began to stretch across time zones. Letters grew infrequent, calls shorter. Alyssa, unable to endure the long absences, chose to let him go. It was not a breakup born of betrayal, but of inevitability. Years later, she would tell friends that he was the one person she never stopped wishing well. For Sam, it remained his most innocent love, unspoiled, unsullied by fame, something he would later recall with quiet fondness when the world had become far less kind. By 2012, the tide of his career had begun to shift. His face was appearing more often on screens, his name whispered in casting circles across London and Los Angeles. It was around this time, at a modest Hollywood gala, that he was introduced to Amy Shields, an Irish actress whose talent and independence made her stand out in an industry obsessed with appearances. Their connection, though discreet, was immediate. In the fictional account of their relationship, Amy and Sam's bond was one of shared understanding rather than grand passion. They met often in quiet tea rooms, away from the press, where they would talk for hours about literature, the loneliness of ambition, and the strange life of those who live half in the real world and half in characters. When Sam began filming Outlander, Amy was among the few who saw how deeply the role consumed him. She would send him messages of encouragement late at night, words that helped him stay grounded amid the whirlwind of early fame. But as Outlander became a global phenomenon, the scrutiny intensified. Rumors multiplied, paparazzi followed, and Amy, who cherished privacy, began to withdraw. "I never wanted to love in headlines," she once told him. By autumn 2014, they parted ways quietly. No press releases, no heartbreak on display. Just two people who understood that sometimes love cannot survive the glare of public expectation. The next chapter of his romantic life was less private. though no less complex. In 2017, as Outlander reached the peak of its popularity, Sam attended a post-Oscars charity event in Los Angeles and was photographed alongside Mackenzie Moy, a rising star in both film and fashion. Their chemistry was unmistakable, and the media, always eager for a narrative, painted them as Hollywood's newest golden couple. In this fictional telling, their connection was real but fragile, a collision of two bright, ambitious souls caught in the machinery of fame. They appeared together at several events, shared knowing smiles, and seemed, for a while, to embody the effortless elegance that fans adored. When Mackenzie posted a vintage black and white photo of them together, captioned "Beautiful Memories," the internet erupted, only for her to delete it hours later, fueling even more speculation. Behind the facade, however, the truth was simpler and sadder. Between his constant travel and her rising commitments, intimacy gave way to exhaustion. Mackenzie once confessed that being with Sam felt like loving a constellation, beautiful, but always too far away. By the end of 2018, they drifted apart as quietly as they had met, neither blaming the other, both understanding that timing can be the cruelest force of all. The years that followed brought fleeting connections, small sparks in the vast landscape of his fame. Sam was occasionally linked to Cody Kennedy and Abby Salt, two young creatives known for their charm and independence. The tabloids mentioned their names with the usual flair. Dinners together, shared projects, late-night walks. But the truth, even in fiction, was far less sensational. These were passing encounters, moments of companionship rather than passion, where two people in the same chaotic industry found comfort in shared silence. Sam, by this stage, had learned the cost of visibility. He knew that every glance could become a headline, every kindness a story. "I've learned," he once said in an interview, "that love, when too exposed, begins to fade like film left in sunlight." And so, he kept his heart guarded, careful, unwilling to risk another piece of himself to the machinery of speculation. Then came 2022, the year that would once again pull his private world into public view. It was a rainy afternoon in New York, the kind of gray drizzle that turns the city's energy inward. In a small cafe in Soho, Sam was photographed kissing Monica Clark, an Australian model and contemporary dancer. The image spread across tabloids within hours, the internet roaring with speculation. The headlines were relentless. Outlander star's secret romance revealed. Mystery woman in Sam Heughan's life identified. In truth, Monica represented something different for him. A kind of freedom. She was not from his world, not bound by the same rhythms of fame. Their relationship, though brief, was marked by genuine warmth. They met through mutual friends at a charity event and connected instantly through shared humor and a love for travel. She admired his depth and gentleness, and he, in turn, was captivated by her simplicity. For a time, she became a sanctuary, someone who reminded him of the joy in living without performance. But as with every story of love in the public eye, exposure became their undoing. The constant scrutiny, the speculation, the intrusion into moments meant to be private, wore them down. By late 2023, they quietly separated, choosing peace over persistence. Sitting in that Edinburgh pub years later, with the threat of his past being laid bare, Sam thought about them all, the women he had loved, the ones he had almost loved, and the ones he had lost to time and circumstance. To the public, these were names attached to headlines. To him, they were moments of truth, fragments of tenderness that had shaped the man behind the myth. He realized that what had haunted him most was not the fear of exposure, but the ache of memory, the knowledge that every love, however fleeting, had left something permanent within him. As he sipped his wine, he thought about how fame amplifies everything but intimacy. For years, he had played characters who loved fiercely, protected deeply, but in his real life, love had become something he had to hide, something too fragile to survive under the weight of millions of eyes. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the moonlight reflected off the cobblestones. He smiled faintly, remembering Alyssa's laughter in the park, Amy's late-night messages, Mackenzie's bittersweet goodbye, and Monica's bright, fearless smile. They were no longer stories to him. They were lessons, reminders that even in a life scripted by destiny, the heart writes its own unpredictable lines. For all his fame and success, Sam had come to understand that love, like art, only thrives in truth and vulnerability. He raised his glass, not in regret, but in quiet gratitude, for every soul who had once walked beside him in the beautiful, complicated journey that was his life. And as the city around him breathed and settled into sleep, he finally felt something he had not felt in a long time. Peace, the kind that comes not from forgetting, but from finally being unafraid to...
This train,
Listen, it's all up to her. I mean, come on. I do the fun bit and then...
Right. Yeah, 3 kids is, it seems...
As the soft rain washed over the ancient streets of Edinburgh, the flickering lamplight fell upon the stone facades that had watched centuries of love and loss, and within one of its narrow alleys, Sam Heughan sat alone, his reflection trembling faintly in the half-filled glass before him. The night was heavy with silence, a silence only broken by the faint sound of jazz escaping from a dimly lit bar and the distant hum of traffic fading into the damp wind. His phone vibrated with an email, anonymous and signed, mercilessly clear. Every secret from the past 17 years would soon be laid bare. Every love, every whisper, every photograph hidden away in quiet moments of tenderness would be cast into the blinding scrutiny of public light. His pulse tightened. Fame had given him fortune, but it had also made him a hostage of memory, and now those memories were being weaponized. He sat there, thinking of the faces, the laughter, the small heartbreaks that had shaped him into the man he had become. From the innocence of his first love to the restrained ache of his last. He remembered the girl with the soft voice, Alyssa Grant, a local indie singer he met in Glasgow when he was still just a dreamer, not yet the man adored across continents. She had spoken to him about melodies and the quiet rebellion of art, and he had listened like someone who had just discovered music itself. For months they walked along Prince's street gardens, talking about dreams too fragile to survive the storms of ambition. But when his career began to take him across borders, the calls became fewer, the silences longer, until even memory itself became distant. That quiet, unannounced goodbye became the first lesson in the price of pursuit. To reach for greatness, sometimes one must let go of gentleness. Years passed, and in 2012, the lights of Hollywood began to glimmer faintly at the edge of his journey. It was there he met Amy Shields, the Irish actress whose laughter reminded. Under the warm, dim lights of a jazz club in New York, the melody of a slow trumpet floated across the room like a soft confession. And it was there that Sam met Monica for the first time, both unaware that their brief greeting would later unfold into a quiet yet profound chapter of each other's lives. Monica had just moved to the United States for work, her life neatly compartmentalized between meetings, late-night emails, and the invisible longing for something real amid the rhythm of success. While Sam, who had spent years drifting between film sets, interviews, and long nights of solitude, found in her an unexpected calm. There was nothing hurried about their first conversation. It was the kind of exchange that existed between pauses, glances, and laughter too subtle to capture on camera. The feeling between them was gentle, not too urgent, but deep enough to stir something inside Sam that had long been dormant. For the first time in years, his heart fluted softly, shyly, like the return of a forgotten song. They began meeting in secret, weaving their affection through the spaces left untouched by fame and public curiosity. Monica, despite her demanding schedule, often flew to Scotland, where Sam felt most himself. Away from the noise, surrounded by the hush of the Highlands. They would walk through the open fields, sometimes in silence, sometimes with Sam playing the guitar beneath a twilight sky while Monica read poetry by candlelight. It was a love that breathed quietly, sustained by simple rituals and the belief that something delicate could survive if kept hidden from the world's eyes. But love, when forced to live in secrecy, often bends under the weight of what it cannot show. As months turned into years, rumors began to stir. Murmurs of Sam's private life, speculation from fans, the hungry lens of the media always searching for a new angle. The pressure crept in, slow but persistent. Monica, though resilient, began to feel the exhaustion of loving someone whose life was watched by millions. Sam, in turn, carried the guilt of knowing that every gesture of affection could become a headline. By the end of 2022, they decided to take a step back, not out of anger, but out of care. They told themselves it was temporary, a pause to breathe, to protect what remained tender between them. Yet deep down, both knew that sometimes the act of preservation is also a quiet surrender. Time moved on, as it always does, and the story seemed to fade into the soft archives of memory, until May 2024, when the media, restless as ever, caught wind of a new chapter in Sam's life. On May 29th, photographs began circulating online. Sam Heughan, dressed in black, walking through the streets of London's Soho district hand in hand with a mysterious woman. The glow of the streetlights caught their silhouettes as they passed unnoticed by most, but not by the relentless camera lenses that never truly sleep. The tabloids speculated wildly, headlines flaring across People.com and countless fan pages. Sam Heughan's new mystery companion? The captions read, as fans dissected every pixel, every possible detail of who she might be. In truth, or at least within the fictional frame of the story, that woman was Evelyn Blackwood, a young screenwriter developing a documentary about the hidden beauty of Scotland. Their meeting had been unplanned, a shared seat at a documentary premiere, a brief exchange about music and landscape, about how silence can be its own kind of dialogue. Something in that conversation lingered. They met again, for dinner, for long walks through art galleries, for quiet afternoons that needed no script. It wasn't love yet, but it was possibility. The fragile beginning of something Sam had not allowed himself to feel for a long time. When asked by journalists about his relationship status, he had smiled faintly and said, "I'm open to something." The kind of phrase that reveals nothing yet carries a hint of of truth. Evelyn, graceful and private, never commented. Their connection existed in that liminal space between public and private, between hope and hesitation. For Sam, Evelyn became a mirror of transition. She represented the threshold between who he had been, a man guarded by his own fame, and who he might become if he dared to live without concealment. Yet he knew the cost of exposure, the way love can be swallowed whole by the glare of celebrity culture. And so he walked cautiously, holding her hand but still holding back parts of himself. Love, for him, had always been a balancing act between truth and survival. Then, one rainy night in Edinburgh, as thunder rolled softly in the distance, Sam received an email from an anonymous address. Its subject line read simply, "Your truth will be told." The message inside was colder than the storm outside. "All of your relationships since 2008 will be revealed. From Alyssa to Evelyn, from Amy to Monica. Every text, every photograph, every hug will be sent to the media." His hands trembled slightly as he read the words. There was no signature, no hint of motive, just a quiet threat, written with the precision of someone who knew too much. For a moment, he felt his chest tighten, the air thinning around him. He knew that if the past were exposed, the world would react with curiosity, judgment, perhaps even betrayal. But if he stayed silent, the secret itself would devour him slowly from within. And so, instead of hiding, he made a decision that would change everything. He would face it. Sam decided to take control of the story before someone else told it for him. He would hold a press conference, not for scandal, not for confession, but for clarity. He wanted, for once, to tell his truth on his own terms, to speak as a man rather than a public figure. He chose September 1st, 2025, a symbolic date, the beginning of autumn, a season of quiet transformations. The venue was set, a modest conference room in Edinburgh, his homeland. When the day arrived, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Cameras, microphones, and flashes filled the room like restless energy. Fans, journalists, and strangers waited in silence as Sam walked to the podium. He looked calm, though inside him a storm raged, a mix of fear, relief, and something close to peace. The lights flickered softly against his face as he began to speak. "I know you're here to listen," he said slowly, his voice carrying both gravity and grace. "You're here to wonder, to question. Today, I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to tell the truth. To remind you that I'm human. I have loved, lost, and feared. He began recounting each chapter of his life not as scandal but as story. Alyssa, he said, his tone softening, was the first person I ever gave a gentle smile to. She taught me how fragile trust can be. He paused before continuing. Amy, who shared with me the late-night conversations about art and meaning. Mackenzie, whose love lived in the spotlight, bright but breakable. Monica, whose tenderness was a refuge from the world's noise. And Evelyn, he exhaled, who stands now in a space between public and private, waiting for me to choose honesty over fear. Each name he spoke was like an offering, a thread pulled from the tapestry of his life. I have not always been strong, he continued. There were times I stayed silent because I thought I was protecting someone. Times I walked away not because I stopped loving, but because I was afraid that love, when watched too closely, might collapse under the weight of expectation. But silence can also be a kind of prison. The more I hid, the lonelier I became. The room remained still, no sound but the faint hum of camera shutters. Some reporters lowered their phones. Some fans, invited to witness this moment, wiped away tears. It was no longer a press event but a collective exhale, a reminder of shared humanity behind the headlines. When the floor opened for questions, the first voice was hesitant but firm. "Do you regret not going public sooner?" a journalist asked. Sam took a long pause before answering. "Yes," he said softly.